Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Horror Trans. I am Stephanie Bree. I am a transgender woman and I talk about all things horror. And today's horror icons is going to be witches, warlocks, and pagans. And I'm kind of lumping these all together because I'm a pagan witch myself. Warlock, I am only going to use in the title of this film, or excuse me, this video, and not use again because a warlock is just a male witch and we just call them witches. They're just witches. Warlock is an outdated term, so we don't use that term anymore. So I'm really talking about witches and pagans, which are not necessarily the same thing, but there's enough intersect between pagans and witches that I felt like they should get a single video together. I don't think there's really enough distinction between the two to give them their own separate videos. And I say this as a pagan witch in real life who has studied various pagan mythologies and witchcraft practices around the world. And yeah, most pagans practice witchcraft, and a lot of witches will identify as pagan. And yes, this will include Wiccan pagans. Wiccans are a form of pagans, even though they're also witches. So, for clarity, historical and real world clarity, witches and pagans are not the same thing. And Wiccans and pagans are not the same thing. Wiccans are a type of witch, but not all witches are Wiccan. Wiccan is a very specific religious order that relies heavily on witchcraft. Paganism is basically, well, okay, the oversimplified form of paganism is any religion that is older than Christianity. Basically, it's everything that's not Christian. So these are the old world religions. This would be Irish mythology. This would be Norse mythology, Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Egyptian mythology, Babylonian mythology, Aztec mythology, Native American mythology, etc., etc., etc. These are all loosely considered pagan. But pagan also refers to, and there's also neo-pagan, which is a whole separate thing, and pagan reconstructionism, which is a whole separate thing. And I'm only touching on these. This isn't going to be the whole video. But the differences are pretty much most pagans are witches. All Wiccans are witches, but Wiccans are also pagans. But not all witches are Wiccan, and not all pagans are Wiccan either. So that's just, for clarity's sake. Which I know sounds confusing because I'm talking fast. So when I say witches, I'm referring to anyone who practices witchcraft. This does include, Caribbean voodoo. And pagan refers to pretty much anyone who worships or has a polytheistic religion that isn't Christianity or based on the Judeo-Christian faith. So these are all the pre-Christian, pre-Jewish religions. So, Babylon, etc., like I just mentioned. But Hollywood usually, like most Americans do, lumps them all together, and there's really no distinction. For example, in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Curse of the Black Pearl, they make it obvious that the Christian God exists and has physical, spiritual influence in the world, but also a heathen God, which heathen is the name of the Norse pagan religion. It's an actual title, but it's also a word applied, like pagan, applied to what Christians view as lesser religions, so it has a double meaning. But the heathen God also has spiritual and physical power and influence on the world. So in the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, as an example, which is what we see in most Hollywood depictions, the pagan gods are real, and the Christian God is equally real. And then, Satan and the minions of hell, the demons and devils, etc., are also real. So in Hollywood, it's pretty much all just anything goes. They just pick and choose from whichever mythology they want. They even do this in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. By and large, for the most part, Hollywood gets it wrong. I have not seen very many accurate depictions of witches in Hollywood. And obviously, practical magic and the craft are the two examples that come the closest. And those aren't, either of them aren't even true horror movies necessarily. But those are the two that come the closest that I've seen of true witchcraft, like as it's actually practiced by real world people. 99% of your witches are not devil worshippers. 99% of your witches don't even believe in the devil. They're not Christians. Most witches don't even recognize the existence of the Christian God. They either recognize the existence of, some form of the, the mother goddess and maybe the horn god, as what we find in Wicca, or they believe in some various pantheon of gods that comes from whichever pantheon they pick and choose from. Either the Irish pantheon or the Norse pantheon or the Roman pantheon, Greek, whatever. So most witches are not devil worshippers. Yet all witches in Hollywood are fucking devil worshippers. So Hollywood gets that wrong right off the goddamn bat. Right off the goddamn bat. It's coming at it from a Christian slant. I have yet to see a Hollywood production film that even gets Wicca right. Most Hollywood films that talk about witchcraft don't even acknowledge the existence of Wicca as an organized religion. It's not even mentioned. The only example, one example out of all the horror movies I've seen, and this includes TV shows, the only one example I have ever seen of witchcraft specifically referred to as Wicca is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And even they get that wrong, because in Buffy, the Wiccans don't believe the magic is real, and they're surprised that Willow does. When in real life, Wiccans will tell you, yes, magic is real, and we do real magic. So, middle finger to Josh Whedon for that. Pagans are a little more complicated. While we do have ample evidence and, I'll say, examples of witchcraft in its various depictions in the historical record, and Wicca, which didn't even come into existence until the 20th century, is very well documented. What the hell? My laptop came unplugged. That's not good. How did that happen? Hold on, I gotta plug my laptop in. So, Wicca didn't even come into existence until the 20th century. That's very well documented, because it's not, I'm not going to say an invented religion, because you could argue all religions are invented. I'm going to say it's a discovered religion, or a reconstruction of an older religion, as what Wiccans will tell you it is. And to be respectful to their beliefs, that's how I will categorize it. So Wicca is itself well documented. Pagan culture, pagan traditions, pagan religions, pagan beliefs, on the other hand, have not been well documented. The pagans were eradicated by the Christians. And when I say eradicated, I mean they were wiped out. Their books, their sacred texts were all destroyed. There are no modern examples. First reference examples of pagan texts. They do not exist. The Greeks were destroyed, the Romans were destroyed, the Norse were destroyed, the Irish were destroyed. They were all destroyed. The Christians were thorough in their genocide of pagan culture. Not just in the books, so there's no legit first source accurate record of what pagans believed by their own account from their own words, because what we have are Christians who observed pagan practices and wrote down what they saw from a Christian slant, which means it's tainted in its accuracy anyways. So to that end, I cannot say one way or the other that Hollywood has ever accurately depicted pagan practices and cultures, because nobody knows what an accurate pagan practice or culture looks like. And no one ever will, because we don't have time travel. And you can't go back to the 300 AD and observe a pagan ritual firsthand. You just can't do that. It's impossible. So what we do know of paganism the various pagan cultures comes from mostly the Druids, who passed it down word of mouth, which I would say is mostly reliable. But obviously, if you've ever played the game of telephone, you know that word of mouth and oral tradition can get lost in translation. Things can get added and taken away and changed going forward. So I would say firsthand accounts from the Druids are as accurate as we're ever going to get. So based on that, I can say with fairly good certainty we've never seen a proper pagan ritual depicted on film that's historically accurate, because we just don't know. But from what we do know, from what we can assume based on observations by the Christians and told through folklore, what we see in Hollywood is still not accurate to the folklore. It's got the Christian slant to it, usually. Now, I have already talked about Midsummer, and I'm not going to talk about it much. Again, I did just rewatch it, but I'm not going to talk about it again. But Midsummer is probably the closest to a real pagan ritual we've ever seen in Hollywood in its purest form. So mostly what you get is bullshit, like what we see in Season of the Witch or Halloween Curse of Michael Myers, which is fucking made up Christian propaganda, and I have no interest in that bullshit. However, let's talk about horror icons as horror icons. Witches make good villains. Witches make good villains because, from the Hollywood perspective, they're devil worshippers, and they're summoning evil magic from the pits of hell. And this makes for a good villain because, they're pure evil, and evil is scary. Pagans, on the other hand, aren't necessarily evil, although they're usually depicted as evil or primitive in Hollywood. Pagans, I would classify as more innocent of, not ignorant of Christianity, because, you don't have to look at paganism through the lens of Christianity. You don't have to do that. You do not have to do anything from a Christian lens. We can just pretend like Christianity don't exist and observe the world as it is. We can do that. It's okay to do that. So pagans are more, I would say, I don't want to say primitive, but they're less advanced in their rituals are pretty well defined and their customs are pretty well defined. So they're not primitive in that sense, but what they are is more nature based. So there's less, muddling, there's less technology, there's I won't say there's less iconography and use of religious symbols, because there are religious symbols in paganism. An example would be the ruins or the Celtic cross or tarot decks, candles, crystals, things like that. So pagans do use religious symbols and iconography. Now, again, most modern pagan practices are either trying to reconstruct older practices based on what we can decipher, while filtering out the Christian slant as best as we can do, which means you kind of have to have a familiarity with Christianity in order to do that. So you can spot the obvious Christianization of pagan practices and scrub that out, which is difficult to do. Pagans as horror villains, on the other hand, are usually depicted as tribes somewhere in the woods, and they're usually cannibals, or they do human sacrifices and things of that nature. And so they're often depicted as vile, not necessarily evil, but vile people who do nasty things, but they do so because it's their culture, not necessarily because they're inherently evil. Usually it's to please a god. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't really have accurate depictions of what paganism looked like because of Christianity. Now, this is not necessarily to say Christianity is in and of itself a bad thing. Obviously, I was raised Christian, so I'm very familiar with Christian mythology. But they do have an air of arrogance about them, by and large, where they believe that their religion is superior to all others. And they either are flat out dismissive of other religions, or worse, actively destructive towards other religions. Which is unfortunate, because this means a lot of the older religions have more or less been stamped out, and true believers are trying to recreate something that we believe is more real than Christianity because it's older and was around longer. It is more authentic to us. And no, I do not believe that Zeus and Thor and Brigid and, the Luge and Pan and the Horn God, etc., 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 are just demons pretending to be gods, because that's a Christian slant. So don't come at me in the comments with that bullshit nonsense either. Your comment will get deleted, and you'll likely get banned from the comment section in my channel. And do not quote the fucking Bible in my comment section. That comment will get deleted. Do not do it. This is a flat out don't even fucking do it. Unfortunately, this puts us in a precarious position where we don't have a choice in Hollywood, in indie films, even, but to represent pagans as we know them today, which is with a Christian slant. Because reconstructing heathenism or Irish paganism or, the Greek mythology, etc., these old religions, is next to impossible to do so accurately. So at best, we're just guessing. At best. We're doing our best, but a lot of it has been lost to time. And just like Jesus doesn't manifest physically today to tell people that, Donald Trump ain't a real Christian, the old gods don't manifest themselves physically today to give us any instructions on what we're doing right or wrong. Unfortunately, this is just the way it is. Which obviously lends itself to, opening the door for atheism and agnosticism, which, I'm not entirely open to, because I have personal relationships with 12 deities, and I believe they're as real to me as Christ is to a Christian. So that's where I stand. But because this is a horror channel, as horror villains, witches make good villains, pagans not so much. And the reason why I say pagans not so much is because pagans are often misrepresented. Even based on what we do know about them, they're misrepresented because of the Christian slant. As are witches, but pagans get the shaft all the way around. Like I said, Midsummer did a damn good job of doing its best to accurately portray paganism. And as far as I know, that's the only film that I have seen that I would say has made an effort. All others just go off of, the Christian bullshit, which is pagans are bad because they're devil worshippers. Again, because they're primitive people that believe in these false gods is the Christian narrative. Middle finger to that. And I'm sorry if I offended you if you happen to be Christian. This is not an attack on Christianity. This is an attack on hostile Christians whose arrogance and superiority, belief in superiority of their own religion has destroyed other people's lives. So that's all this is.